I had this young man once I was working with who had this horrible temper and was always throwing clubs. And so we worked really, really hard on teaching him some meditation skills, getting the parasympathetic nervous system a little bit more activated. And he said, well, what do I do when I get angry on the golf course? And I said, well, I'd rather you focus on being calm on the golf course and just make a deal with yourself. If you decide you want to throw a club, when you're done with your round, go out to the range and throw as many clubs as you want. And you'll just feel better. You say, I'll take care of this when I'm on the range after the round. And he said, but I won't want to do it then. And I was like, and your point?
That does remind me of the chapter I have in Zen Golf called The Angry Guy.
Yeah.
And the Zen master says, what do I do about my temper? And the Zen master says, show me your temper. Yeah, but I'm not mad right now. He said, well, then if you can't produce it, then you're not an angry person. You just have a habit of getting angry.
Yes.
And it's a matter of changing the habit.
Hi, this is James Wilson from Richmond, Missouri, and I play at the Shirky Golf Club. This is Golf Smarter number 905.
The Grandson and the Zen Doctor. The introduction of Dr. Bob Jones IV to Dr. Joe Parent.
This is Golf Smarter. Sharing stories, tips, and insights from great golf minds to help you lower your score and raise your golf IQ. Here's your host, Fred Greene.
Welcome back to the Golf Smarter podcast, Dr. Joe.
Nice to be with you, Fred.
This is going to be a fun one. I am so excited that you're here because I also get to say, welcome back to the Golf Smarter podcast, Dr. Bob.
It's great to be with you, Fred. And now here you are with a paradox.
What? Not, oh, God. I was like, wait. Oh, it is a pair of ducks. That's pretty good. Is that what we're going to be doing?
Hashtag sad.
Well, the thing that we get accused of daddy humor, right? Daddy humor is nothing more than wordplay. I think it's very clever. Let our kids roll their eyes, but daddy humor is very clever, and you just proved it.
I am working on a book of dad riddles.
Are you really? And it's going to be, and all the pictures are going to be drawn by your sister?
No, I have another illustrator, and it's like what kind of animal will help you get across a river? It's a giraffe. See? Exactly.
Okay. I'm going to just move forward here. So the reason I have the two of you together is because the last time Dr. Bob was on, and that was just the week of the Masters, he and I were talking after our recording, and I had mentioned to him about my trip to Japan. And I've said this story many times on the podcast. My trip to Japan, we meditated with a Zen Buddhist monk for an hour. And during the Zen Buddhist conversation, somebody asked him about moving meditation, and he brought up the book Zen Golf by Dr. Joe Parent. And I'm like, wait a minute. He called it the Zen of Golf. And I went, Zen Golf by Joe Parent? He goes, yes, that's the book in Japanese is being interpreted. And I was like, oh my God. So I was telling Bob this story, and he was like, oh, I love that book. I've always loved that book. And I'm like, wait, have you ever met Dr. Joe? And he's like, no, I haven't. I said, would you like to? And you guys, I introduced the two of you, and you seem to hit it off. So tell me about your first conversation together, and you guys can take it from here.
Well, Fred, when you mentioned about my getting together with Dr. Joe, we set up what I think was supposed to have been about a 15-minute phone call on Sunday.
Oh, I hate when this happens. Unfortunately, the rest of this story was lost. Dr. Bob fell off the call, obviously. But to paraphrase, he was saying that how much of a fan he was of all the Zen Golf books, including one that he couldn't remember the name of the book, but commented on its beautiful artwork. So we're going to pick it up. We did get back on the call, and we're going to pick it up here with Dr. Joe responding to what Bob said before we realized that he wasn't being recorded. And then from here on out, the rest of the conversation's intact. I'm sorry about the glitch.
Thank you. It's called Golf, the Art of the Mental Game. And it is illustrated with drawings by Ravielli. And on the back cover is a picture of your grandfather's follow-through, because that was the chapter "Get to the Finish." So we used his finish as the illustration for that. 100 illustrations and 100 one-page chapters.
It's a funny thing about Ravielli. He did a lot of the illustrations for my grandfather's books, particularly Bobby Jones on Golf. And then later, I believe in 66 or 67, my grandfather asked him to do a book called Bobby Jones on the Basic Golf Swing, which was sepia drawings by Ravielli. He was, without question, my grandfather's go-to artist. But the thing that really I thought was really interesting about our conversation, Joe, was how in our work with athletes, how much we are working on getting to the same place, but with a slightly different approach. I was really quite captivated by that when we spoke.
I talked about that when I did the introduction to Zen Golf. I said, sports psychologists are trying to get everybody to the same place, to have a focused mind, to be more in the present, to have positive self-talk and a lot of other things. And what I tried to do in Zen Golf to separate myself was to talk about the path to get there. I remember one of my players said he'd worked with another sports psychologist, and the guy said, I get it. I'm being way too hard on myself. What should I do? And he said, the guy leaned in and said to him, don't be. And he said, what am I supposed to do with that? Just don't be. So I want to give a path from hard to yourself, a pathway from there to don't be, that you can actually take the steps and train and find the way to get from where you are to where you want to be.
Right. And it's funny you mentioned that, because, one of the things that I always like to tell the clients that I work with is that the brain does not know how to do a negative. So if you tell somebody don't do something, well, actually, the very first thing you have to do is you have to conceptualize in your mind what it is that you don't want to do before you don't do it. And the problem is that just puts you in this feedback loop that is just awful. I don't know that if I've ever told anybody to not do something. What I often try to get them to do is to figure out what is it that you want, and then kind of go from there. And I think the Zen approach, or the approach you take, Joe, just is so good at helping people get kind of a 30,000 foot view of what all is going on. As I said, I kind of come at this slightly differently. I mean, I had this young man once I was working with who had this horrible temper and was always throwing clubs. And so we worked really, really hard on teaching him some meditation skills, getting the parasympathetic nervous system a little bit more activated. And he said, well, what do I do when I get angry on the golf course? And I said, well, I'd rather you focus on being calm on the golf course and just make a deal with yourself. If you decide you want to throw a club, when you're done with your round, go out to the range and throw as many clubs as you want. And you'll just feel better. Just say, I'll take care of this when I'm on the range after the round. And he said, but I won't want to do it then. And I was like, and your point?
Yes, that does remind me of the chapter I have in Zen Golf called The Angry Guy. And the Zen master, he says, what do I do about my temper? And the Zen master says, well, show me your temper. He said, yeah, but I'm not mad right now. He said, well, then if you can't produce it, then you're not an angry guy. an angry person. You just have a habit of getting angry, and it's a matter of
Yes.
changing the habit. When you said that you told them to do it afterwards, I use a technique using the locker room where if somebody's got a lot on their mind that's outside of golf, and they say, well, I'm playing in a tournament, what do I do? And I actually gave this to Christy Kerr and a number of other golfers. I said, get a little Tupperware container, a little storage container with a lid. And before you go out, take whatever thoughts you have in mind that you don't want to be thinking on the golf course and say, I'm putting you in this container. Wait for me. You're not going to help me when I'm on the golf course, and I can't do anything about you when I'm on the golf course. I promise I'll take care of you when I get done. And you wait for me in the locker room, and then put the lid on and put it in the locker or in your car if you don't have a locker. And then if the thought shows up on the golf course, to say, what are you doing here? I told you, stay in the container. I promise I'll take care of you. You're not going to help me out here, and I can't do anything about you out here. I promise I'll take care of you when I'm done, and then let it go. So it's an after the round promise that your suggestion reminded me of.
Well, and Joe, I plan on stealing that without attribution. So that is now in my repertoire.
I'll consider it
and
alone.
That's why I brought you guys together
Well, thank you.
in the first place. Is because I knew that you'd have a lot to share.
This was what our conversation was like, back and forth like this. So I don't remember if I shared this with you, Bob, when I was working on Zen Golf and Zen putting, and I quoted your grandfather from those books that you mentioned. And I wanted to share a couple of them with you. One is in a chapter called "What is Your Target?" And I'll just read this little passage. The great champion Bobby Jones considered, when our intention is to avoid embarrassment or protect against making mistakes, we make what we think is a careful swing and try to guide the shot where we want it to go. This prevents us from making a free, full swing and usually produces a poor shot. The great champion Bobby Jones considered this his most serious weakness. He found that when he was comfortably ahead in a tournament, he began to fear the embarrassment of not holding his lead. He would try to control his swing to avoid making a mistake. Instead of picking a target, he focused on avoiding hazards. He felt that he would have won far more tournaments and finished more easily the ones he did win had he focused on his targets as much when leading as when chasing.
Mm-hmm.
So that was
Yep.
really, and you can see that any tournament that you watch. The other one is called "Beware of Trying for a Few Extra Yards," and that comes right out of his quote. Bobby Jones said, "Trying for a few extra yards at the last moment is the cause of most of the mistakes that happen on the tee."
It's kind of hard to disagree with a guy that won something like that, either finished first or second in 80% of the tournaments that he entered between 1923 and 1930. So, and it's funny you brought that up on that first point. As we're recording this, just last weekend was the 100th anniversary of my grandfather's first victory in the United States Open, which was contested at Inwood Country Club outside of New York City, outside of Manhattan. And, in that tournament, he finished the last three holes, bogey, bogey, double bogey. Bogey, double bogey, bogey, and blew the lead and tied Bobby Cruikshank. And when people were still congratulating him on winning the championship, he said, no, I finished like a yellow dog. And the next day in the playoff, rather than guiding the shot, as you mentioned, he came to the 18th hole and he put it into the right rough. He had about 190 yards to the green and about a 15-mile-an-hour wind in his face. And he got over there, and Cruikshank had been in the left rough and had to lay up. and he's looking at the shot in the right rough, and he's on hard pan. And the people who witnessed it said he wasted no time, reached into his bag, got a 2-iron, and just hit a tremendous shot, knocking it 6 feet from the hole and winning his first Open. And I find that really fascinating because in that final round, he finished terribly because he was trying to protect something rather than continue to build it. And then in the playoff, when he had the opportunity, he acted quickly and decisively and hit a career shot, which had he not made the shot, probably would have been the end of his competitive career. So, yeah.
Very, very timely. So that's exactly it. And I was thinking about that. Another quote from him that I use called in telling people to focus on their personal par, to readjust par.
Oh, yes.
to their handicap. And so Bobby Jones said he started winning his matches when he stopped playing against the other guy and started playing against old man par.
Correct.
Oh, wow.
I vary that just a little bit, Joe, and I'll tell you what I do. I always have people play against their average score because a personal par is actually going to be based, if they base it off their handicap, will be based at like 90 or 95% of the differentials of the best 10 of 20. So I just tell people, I said, take what your average score is and set that as your target.
I love it. That's great.
People just, it just makes people really relax a lot more.
Yeah, I've had this conversation recently talking about how the handicap really represents your potential, not what kind of golfer you are. I mean, you've had some good rounds,
yes,
and it's going to look at that. But when it comes to the gambling part, taking your potential, it makes it a different beast.
Exactly.
All right, we're going to take a time out. We're going to pick this up right after this. All right, Joe. So what did the personal par thing? I always thought I made that up, but no, I was obviously quoting you. But personal par, just play to that and stop beating yourself up because par is fascist. But what?
Well, I liked what Bob said about the handicap, and when people are frustrated about not playing to their handicap, I explain to them that the way that it's set up is that because it's a percentage of the average of your lowest 10 differentials, so you even throw out your high scores on some of the holes, you're only going to do that 1 out of 4 or 5 rounds. So I say, if I told you about this sport that I want you to try, it costs a lot of money, it takes a lot of time, and you're only going to enjoy it 1 out of every 4 or 5 times you do it. Are you interested? They said, I wouldn't do that. I said, but that's golf.
Way.
So if you're measuring a good and enjoyable round based on your handicap, so let that go. And I do have people actually change their scorecard. And if your average score is 90, then you don't have any par threes on your scorecard. They're 4s, 5s, and 6s. And for some people with higher handicaps, you get a par 7 on those. I had one student, and he had an okay drive and then kind of a mediocre second shot and kind of topped his third one. They said, oh, that's too bad you didn't get to the green in regulation. He said, no, I have 2 more shots to get to the green in regulation. This is a par 7 for him. And he was just having the best time compared to the usual beating himself up when he doesn't match the score of a scratch golfer.
Wonderful story. So as we are recording this, today is day 2 of the 2023 Open Championship at Royal Liverpool. And yesterday, at the end of round 1, tied for the lead was an amateur from South Africa, Christo Lamprecht, who was at -5 and ended up being tied with Tommy Fleetwood for the round that day. I've just looked up during our last break. I just looked up. He's just finished his second round and is at +3. He dropped to tied for 68th and is on the cut line. +3 is the cut line. So he might make it. But it made me question and look up, when was the last time an amateur won the Open Championship? And it happened to be at the same golf course, Royal Liverpool, 1930. Bob, your grandfather.
Yep. That's correct.
So,
it was the second leg of the Grand Slam.
So please,
that's right.
To carry on from here, tell us history stories. We've talked about the Masters. You talked about your grandfather, the Masters. Now let's talk about the Open Championship.
Well, my grandfather's history in the Open, I think, is a tremendous psychological study. He won it 3 times and played in it 4 times. First time he played in it, he was 19 years old. It was 1921, and it was at the Old Course in St. Andrews. And after starting out reasonably well in the first 2 rounds, he was convinced he had St. Andrews by the tail. And then the wind changed off the North Sea, and he went out and shot 46 on the front 9, double bogeyed number 10, and then on number 11 hit it in the bunker, and 4 shots later was still in the bunker. And at that point, he put his ball in his pocket and withdrew from the tournament. He continued to play in, and what he discovered was, had he finished out the tournament, he would have tied for 3rd, even with a 6 on the 11th hole. But he learned from that, and so when he came back, he came back and won it at Lytham, Royal Lytham in St. Anne's in 1926. And I find it funny, he went to lunch between the 3rd and 4th rounds. Back then, they played both rounds on the last day. And when he came back to the course to go in, he had forgotten his contestant's badge. And he had to pay £2 to get back into the golf course to go play his final round. Now, I suspect that what happened was that the person at the gate knew exactly who he was, but remembered 1921 and was going to just extract a pound of flesh out of him before he got back in. But he won in 26 and then came back. Normally he would only go over when the Walker Cup would be overseas because of the cost of playing. And when he went back over, he went back over at his own expense in 27 to win at St. Andrews. And by then all was forgiven, and the St. Andreans lifted him up on their shoulders to carry him off after he won on the 72nd hole. By the time he came to Hoylake, it was pretty much a foregone conclusion that he was probably going to take that tournament. He had won the amateur just weeks before I think 3 weeks before, at St. Andrews. And so when he got the victory at Hoylake and he returned back to New York, he received his second ticker tape parade, which prompted Mayor Jimmy Walker to introduce him as, he said, never could it be foreseen that this would bring together 2 total polar opposites, namely that the world's greatest golfer would be introduced by the world's worst golfer. And that's that was sort of the story of his British Opens. He only got back to St. Andrews again in 1936, and that was when he was on the way to the Olympics in Berlin. And he played a round of golf there, and when he showed up on the first tee thinking it was just going to be this anonymous game, there were like 200 people waiting on the first tee. By the time he got to the far end of the golf course, all the shopkeepers had put signs on their windows that said "Closed, Bobby's back," and the entire town finished the round with him. He said he hadn't played golf in weeks. He shot 32 going out and 40 coming back for an even par 72. But, the emotion of that was such that he was never really able to talk about it. He was never really able to talk about it again. He said the love that he felt from that city. And I remember when I was first there in 2002 for his centennial of his birth, And I went to a bookstore, and we were just talking, and I picked out an old golf book that I'd always wanted, and the lady saw my credit card. And she said, "My gosh, you're Robert T. Jones IV. Are you related to Bobby?" And I said, "Yes, it's my grandfather." Somebody later said to me, they said, "Well, gosh, did they give you the book for free?" I said, "No, she was a Scot. Of course she took my money. Are you kidding me?" But it's an amazing legacy that he still has, this many years and that far away.
That's remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's truly remarkable. And so how much of your vast historical knowledge is based on your research, and how much of it is family lore that is passed around from person to person?
I'd say about 70-30.
Okay.
And the percentage of family lore drops as time goes on, because what I'm finding out is that many of the myths that are ascribed to my grandfather are just that. They are myths. And I think that when we focus on that mythos, we really lose sight of who the man really was and what it was that he accomplished. And, in a sense, that does two things. At least this is my thought. It deprives us of seeing who this man really was. And the second thing it does is it kind of lets us off the hook from doing what we can to be heroes in those areas of life in which we find ourselves. And I think sometimes we like our heroes to be 4 feet off the ground, because then we have no responsibilities, at least to try to equal that. And I think that's an unfortunate but necessary human tendency. So.
Oh, that was really well said. I think that's
beautiful.
It's a great insight about how we are and how we regard our heroes. And putting them. The word that came to my mind when you said 4 feet off the ground was pedestal, and that's exactly it. And that I really like your insight about that. It separates us from taking responsibility. Now, the interesting thing is, what some people do is they mistake emulate for and try to imitate. And so to try to imitate is really an expression of false confidence. But to try to emulate is to try to move from what I call conditional confidence to unconditional confidence and not get caught in false confidence. So I think that's something really profound and helpful that you pointed out.
Fred, do you mind if I do the interview for 1 second?
No, not at all. Are you kidding? This is awesome.
Joe, could you flesh that out just a little bit more? I was so kind of taken by what you said that I felt like there was even more to it.
But I will be the traffic cop, and I will say we'll be back right after this. Okay. And Joe, you can answer right after this. All right, Joe, I'm sorry to interrupt. Let's go to your answer.
Well, I think everybody knows, and it's pretty clear what false confidence is, and that absolutely doesn't hold up. And it becomes the emperor without clothes. So the difference that you were talking about is between conditional and unconditional confidence. And conditional confidence is believing in what you can do if you've been successful recently. And so, I've been playing well and I feel confident, but as soon as I have a bad hole, I lose all my confidence. Well, if you lose it, then that means it was conditional. It was confidence conditional on playing well. And as soon as you stop playing well, you lose it. So that really sets you up for failure in a certain way. Unconditional confidence is that you believe in yourself regardless of recent performances. So you hear players say, I haven't made the cut the last 2 tournaments, but I'm really close. I'm really close. And they have unconditional confidence in their ability to find their game again and come back to it. And I actually even have 2 aspects to unconditional confidence. One is relative unconditional confidence, which is unconditional confidence in your abilities in a certain field. Mm-hmm. Absolute unconditional confidence is believing in yourself, no matter what it is that you're doing. It doesn't mean that you can suddenly be an expert in some other field, but that you believe in yourself in whatever you're engaged in, and you have confidence that you will handle yourself the best you possibly can in that situation.
That's wow.
Well, it's interesting because just tomorrow, as we're recording this, the Steph Curry documentary is coming out called Underrated. And one of the things that he talked about, and here's somebody who's succeeded just recently in golf, but has succeeded beyond all measure in the NBA. And he talked about his supreme self-confidence, the amount of confidence he has in himself, knowing that he can achieve these things. He's talked about that openly.
So, it doesn't matter if he didn't have a good shooting day one day, the next, right. And if he's not hitting his shots, he starts being the best assist person, the best passer. And so finding a way to get the most out of whatever you brought that day. And that's what I want golfers to do as well. Sometimes you might be struggling a little with the driver. So put the ball in play, which, by the way, if we're talking about history, was what they called the club you used on the tee in the old days in golf. They didn't call it a driver; they called it the play club, because its job was to put the ball in play and then find your way to get around the golf course. And I want to make sure that we fit in one story. I was at the Pro-Am that's out in La Quinta and Palm Desert in that area. I don't remember the name that it's called now, but I was working with Tim Petrovic, who was a winner on the PGA Tour and now contends regularly on the Champions Tour. And he's a kind of a history buff, where he's getting ready for his round, and we're on the putting green. He says, "Well, what do you got for me?" And he was playing well. He just said, "What do you got for me?" And I channeled your grandfather. I channeled Bobby Jones. And I said, "Well, I know your history buff," because Tim would like to say, well, there's golf and there's tournament golf. TUNAMINT, tournament.
That's it, tournament.
Which is Georgian for tournament. And so I said, well, I know you're a big fan of Bobby Jones, so let me give you 2 of his putting advices in putting. One, he said, taking more than 10 seconds to read a putt is a waste of time. And the other is borrow as much as you can, meaning play as much break as you can, because as soon as the ball rolls below that hole, it just keeps going further and further from that precious cup. And I remember that quote.
Yep.
So I watched. Now, he was playing with amateurs, so he got to see a lot and got some time to just walk around the green. But when it came to time for his putt, he stood behind it. He kind of leaned back and said, "Yeah, I think I got it." Walked up, boom, 21 putts. No chip, 21 putts for the round. Yeah.
I had an experience personally similar to that. I used to be one of those that I would take, especially on short shots, I would take practice stroke after practice stroke after practice stroke. I was one of these guys. I mean, it was painful to watch. And I had this one little chip shot at a golf course one time, and I just thought, well, I'm going to make sure I just get this just right. And I think I took like 6 practice strokes. And then I proceeded to jam it like 3 inches fat, moved the ball about 1.5 inches. And I thought, I could have just done that, just walking up to it and hitting it. So that's what I decided to do. And do you know, for the entire rest of the day, where whenever I was just around the green, I would just get up and hit it. I don't think I had any shot where I missed a green where on a chip shot I wasn't like a foot and a half from the hole. You know, you can get to a point, or at least I can, and several of the folks I've worked with over time have discovered this. You can get to a point where you overthink your body's ability to really do something. And nowhere is that more obvious than when you're on the green or around a green. That whole thing about 10 seconds is so right, because how many times has any golfer on the planet stood over a putt and stood behind it and looked at it, and the longer you take, the more you will see breaks that aren't even there.
Wow.
They just aren't there.
Absolutely. And you know, I've actually been able to tell my players, I said, I could tell based on how long you took over the ball, how well the shot was going to come out. And it's a pretty high correlation. So I wouldn't say this with my students, but I say it when I'm playing with my friends. When they miss one like that, I said, you could have hit that bad a shot in a lot less time. and I get a dirty look, but I can't help myself on those. But I have a special technique for around the greens that I developed in a similar way. I was just playing myself on a course, and I had about 40 yards in, and I made my nice little practice swings and proceeded to blade it over the green with the actual shot. And I said, if I had just hit that with my practice swing, it would have been fine. So I dropped another ball, and I said, I'm going to pretend that there's no ball here, and I'm just going to make a practice swing and put it to about 3 feet. I then walked to the other side of the green where my ball was, and it was in a fluffy, downhill, tricky little lie to a downhill roll. And I said, I'm going to do the same thing. And I did take a couple of practice swings through that grass, and I said, that's the one. And then I walked up and I said, just one more practice swing. Boom, rolled down to a foot. I said, okay, that's it. So what I teach my golfers is find a patch of grass that's similar to the lie that your ball is in. Make a swing as if there is a ball there, and hold your finish until you get to the one where you say, that's the one. Then walk up, then address the ball. Now pretend the ball is not there and it's invisible, and just say one more just like that through the grass. And you can even say one more practice swing through the grass. And if they do it really well, they're surprised that a ball took off, but it comes out so much softer and so much better. So your practice swing as if there is a ball there, your real swing as if there isn't a ball there.
I like that.
Oh my God. And how many times, and I know that every person who's listening to this podcast is saying, oh my God, that's happened to me on the golf course, where it's either me or someone I've played with. They're just so frustrated. They're like, okay, I quit, right? I'm just going to finish this and I got to get out of here. You know, I hate this game. I'm never going to play again. And then have the best hole of their life because they just kind of let it all go. Or they make a 50-foot putt after 3-putting 7 times that round. It happens every time. We're going to take one more break, and this leads into a topic that I'm really excited about bringing up to both of you, and we'll do that right after this. This week on Golf Smarter Mulligans is the first of 2 conversations with Geoff Mangum of theputtingzone.com. In the first episode, we talk about a wide variety of topics relevant to putting, including getting started for adults and even getting your kids into putting.
One thing kids want to do is they want to have turns competing. So you got to set up some sort of goal for them. One of my favorites is to perch a golf ball on the edge of a cup and then back off 15, 20, 30 feet and say, okay, here's 3 golf balls. You got 3 chances to bump that golf ball over into the hole. That does a couple of things brain-wise, but fundamentally what it does is it gives a kid a non-rule-based game to play. They really get into that. They go ahead and take their turn, and maybe they get close and miss, and you say, okay, my turn. And you push them out of the way, and you take your 3 balls. And the second one, you bump it over in the hole, and you laugh at them. You say, I got mine. And they'll push you out of the way and say, okay, my turn again. And so they'll put 3 balls down, and then they'll do better. And so you get going that way. You just make the green a playground where kids are not penalized for any kind of misses or anything. They just get turn after turn after turn, and they have all the fun they want.
That's Golf Smarter Mulligans episode 221, featuring Geoff Mangum of theputtingzone.com in an episode we call Great Putting is a Science and a Skill. Next week, we'll get another full hour with Geoff in part 2. Please subscribe for free to both of our golf podcasts, Golf Smarter on Tuesday, and our sister show that revisits the best of the Golf Smarter podcast that's just no longer available that we call Golf Smarter Mulligans. And it's released every Friday from wherever you're listening right now.
You know, what Fred was talking about, I put in the book, and that is people try more and more different things and try lots of different things and again. And finally, about the 16th hole, they say, I give up. I don't care anymore. And they just get up and whack it. And then they had a good shot. And I had a student the other day, he said, I just struggled with the tournament with my setup and my this, that, and the other thing. And I said, what'd you do on this around the 17th hole? He said, well, actually, I just gave up trying on all that stuff, and I striped one down the middle. I said, and now was I there? I don't think so. But how did I know?
Well, yeah, I hate this game. I hate this game. And then that last shot, oh, I love this game. I can't wait to come back again.
Yeah, guess I have to come back tomorrow.
Yep.
Well, what I think I told you this, Bob, when we were talking, when students they get very technical, and you were talking about overthinking, which I agree completely. And you start thinking this technique, and then you do that, and something else goes wrong, so you add another one on, and then you keep adding more on, and you keep adding more on, and I call that moron golf.
I like it. I've played that. I'm a low handicapper in that game.
Let's be nice. Okay. So recently, I came across a video on I don't know, TikTok or something, and a woman who's in the LPGA tour, and I think she's trying to break into the LPGA tour, or maybe she's just getting started, but she's a young woman, and she had this quote that it just jumped out to me. And I've been thinking about it a lot, and I'm so excited to have the two of you to throw this out to. Here's what she said. And I wrote it down, and I'm going to paraphrase it in a sense that some of it is not there. Anyway, she said, the hardest thing about golf for me is that you have to practice like it is the most important thing in the world. And you have to play like you don't care at all. You have to practice every single day and put 100% in. And you can't do that unless you really, really care. But when you tee it up on Thursday, you have to swing free. How do you do that when you really care? Gentlemen?
Well, the first thing that pops into my head is something that my grandfather wrote about, and that Joe's book, I think, books get right to the heart of. And that is that tension is the number one killer of the golf swing. So I don't know, Joe, you may see it differently, but I would have to respectfully disagree with her. Because here's the thing, when you are practicing, what you are really rehearsing is you are rehearsing what it is that you want to be able to do on the golf course. And if you are rehearsing tension, if you are rehearsing something of that level of intensity, I don't know how you then go and just switch that off and just say, now, I've been spending 3 hours on the range working like just working like a dog. And I mean, no offense to my dog who's right here at my feet. But working like a dog, and now I'm going to go out there and just be absolutely relaxed. The human body and the human mind just don't work that way. And now, if what she's saying is simply going out and putting in time at the range and putting in time making the changes she needs to make, well, that's one thing. But I can only go by the words that people use. And those words are words that say to me, I feel this pressure, this tension doing this, and now I have to find a way to magically shut it off. You have to practice what it is that you want to do, and that works just as much for mindset as it does for physical activity.
Well, I agree with you about tension. And what I heard was she does a lot of trying.
Yeah.
And if all she's practicing is trying, then she's going to carry that over and do a lot of trying on the golf course. And we don't want to be doing that. We want to be trusting on the golf course. And it's like I tell Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday is when you work, and Thursday is when you start to play. So, and a lot of golfers do the opposite, and they get grim and intense on Thursday. I was with Fred Funk at a tournament, and he's the happy-go-lucky, always smiling and cheerful. And I remember on Thursday morning, he was following. There were two pros, and they were walking onto the putting green, and there was a young lady there who was holding a rope to keep the public from walking into the putting green. And she let the rope down for the two pros. And as Fred walked up to her, she pulled the rope up. And he said, what are you doing? I'm one of the pros. He said, oh, I didn't think you were a pro. You seemed happy.
Wow.
So that's yeah, right. So that's the grimace, So that's one thing. The other is I do have a chapter in Zen Golf called To Care or Not to Care. And I was working with an instructor in a short game school, and he said, I tell people, go ahead and, swing like you don't care. But when I get out there, I do care. How do I move to not caring? And I said, in the dictionary, there are two definitions of the word care, to care. One is to take a sincere interest in, and the other is to worry about. And this is in the book. And I said, tell me the difference in how you feel when I say these two sentences. I'll do it with you, Fred. Fred, I care about you. Fred, I worry about you.
Yeah, those are pretty close.
Feels pretty different. So if you're turning that towards yourself and your game, you say, yeah, I care about what happens, so I put the work in, but I'm not going to worry about how it turns out, because that creates tension that interferes with my swing.
Exactly.
Wow. It's like in the middle of that is I'm concerned about you. I mean, when you said it, Joe, I care about you, I worry about you, almost to me came across as the same thing.
Well, most people hear, I care about you, that's a positive concern.
Yes.
I worry about you is I'm worried about what could go wrong.
Right.
Okay. Yes.
I normally get the second one. That's
so I actually have implemented for my students, I have them rate their shots after each shot on a worry scale. Mm-hmm. How much were you worried about how it was going to turn out? And working with Christy, I give her credit for this acronym she developed, WAR, worry about results. When I worry about results, I'm at war with myself.
Yes.
And so I have people rate their shot. Okay, on that shot, how much were you worried about how it was going to turn out, and how much did you just trust it and go for it? And 0 on the worry scale, no hold back. That's the only negative I ever use. No holding back.
I like that.
And on the 5 is I was totally, all I thought about was how it was going to turn out, and I just couldn't let myself swing. There's the difference.
Yeah. And there's also a little physical trick that you can do, and it's been done. In fact, the person who is most known for it is Arya Jutanugarn, and that is she will smile before she executes a shot. And that does two purposes. One of the things a smile will do is it will release these muscles right around the mouth. And if tension is going to enter the body anywhere, it's going to enter right there. And from there, it spreads to the neck, which spreads to the shoulders, which spreads then through. And once your neck and shoulders are tense, you are done in the golf swing. The other thing that the smile does is it releases a little oxytocin in the brain, which is like a little happy chemical. And your brain really likes those. It's really hard to be tense when you've got your own body's natural narcotic running through your brain, right? Now, I'm not saying you go around gassed all the time, but what I am saying is just something that simple just keeps you in a much better physical and mental state. I told that to somebody, and I made the mistake of telling it early on in our hour together. And they said to me at the end of the person said, wait a minute, you just told me that in the first 10 minutes. Why am I paying you for a full hour? So I just smile.
Smile and let the oxytocin through.
It's actually a teaching given by Thich Nhat Hanh, one of the most famous masters, and it is a practice to spend as much of the day remembering to smile.
Oh, yeah. Strangely enough, my 99-year-old grandmother knew that.
Wow.
It's the same awesome wisdom, just different words.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Well put.
Well, I want to thank both of you because recently Golf Smarter was named by two different websites as the best mental game podcast. And it's because I quote both of you on a regular basis and have people like you, but more importantly, have you on here. And interestingly, one of the things that I've repeated so many times, Dr. Bob, is you said to me once, you can watch a golf tournament on TV. You knew he was going to miss a putt because you saw the tension in his face.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And that for me, it's like, I realized at that point how much tension I have in my jaw on my swing. And so I regularly try to remind myself to just lose the tension, breathe through it. And Dr. Joe, just the other day, I was playing with somebody, he's a good golfer, a single-digit handicap golfer. He had a bad hole. And I could see as we were standing on the green, he was waiting for a 50-foot putt, for bogey. And I just said, Dr. Joe Parent told me this once, and I love repeating it. And that is, pull out your Etch-a-Sketch, flip it over, shake it, erase it, and let it go. And luckily, he knew what an Etch-a-Sketch was. Although I did see one in a toy store recently, and it said, "No batteries necessary."
That's right.
There you go.
I'm going to borrow that one too, Joe.
Oh, well, gentlemen, this has been an absolute joy for me just because I know that I got to introduce you two because you've both been important people in the last 20 years of my life. And I just am so grateful that you guys connected and that we got to share some of that energy here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fred.
Thanks, Fred.
Joe, it's been great to be with you.
You too. Let's stay in touch.
Definitely.
Oh, so much to report because I played twice over the weekend as my wife was out of town. Maybe I should have checked my horoscope that day because Friday was one of those days that strange things happened one right after another. Check this one out. After I recorded this conversation that you just heard, which clearly had issues in the beginning, I headed out to Peacock Gap for a 90-minute practice session. And after working out on the range, then a lot in the bunker, followed by chipping and pitching, I went over to the putting area and I discovered that I didn't have any balls in my bag, even though I knew I had isolated 9 clean balls before I left the house. So I checked everywhere in my new bag, the one that I'm still getting familiar with, and checked my car. No balls. So I went into the pro shop, and the director of golf, who I've known for years, said, "Hey, we have a bin of used balls here, $1 a piece. Go for it." Great. Thank you. So I grabbed 4 balls, pulled out a 20, and the guy behind the counter just winked at me and said, "Don't worry about it. Go ahead." Thank you. Then I get up to the first tee. I was informed that I was playing with a young couple sitting off to the side in a cart. I introduced myself and asked if they were familiar with the course. She responded sheepishly with, "I'm new to golf." "Have you ever played here before?" "No." "Have you ever played 18 holes before?" "No." Oh boy. But her partner said that he plays a couple times a year, but isn't very good. I suggested that they both play from the front tees, but they declined to say they'll join us on the whites. Okay, fine. And just before we started, a 4th guy pulls up in a cart and introduces himself. So the husband tees off by popping his driver straight up for about 70 to 80 yards total. Then she walks up to the tee box and he starts giving her a lesson on how to hit the ball. The 4th, who we'll call Frank, and I kind of look at each other and then back over to the starter, who runs down to them and says, "Sorry, folks, if you want a lesson, you've got to go to the driving range. There's a long line of people we have waiting to go, and we really don't have time for that now." So they left. Now it's just me and Frank in between a couple of foursomes. But the group in front of us also has a beginner who clearly wasn't familiar with the etiquette of pace of play. When we arrived at the turn, the group in front of us was now almost 2 holes behind the group in front of them, a twosome. And the 10th hole is a par 3. So we asked, "Hey, is it okay if we just play ahead of you?" And they agreed. Thank you. But Frank hits his ball into the bunker, duffs one, then hits out. But in the process, he re-aggravated his bad back, and it was so bad that after the hole, he apologizes and has to go home because the pain is too much to continue. So now I'm all alone, and I don't like to play alone. But there's a twosome in front of me, and I join them and finish a pretty good round with no other bizarre events, although I didn't lose any balls. So the balls that the guy gave me, I went back to the pro shop and said, "Thank you very much. Yeah, you can have these back." He was very impressed. "Thank you," he says. Well, I played again the next day, but this time the July weather here in Northern California was brutal with temperatures in the high 90s for the entire round. And I'm walking, but it wiped me out. So that after a decent 9 holes of being 4 over, I joined my buddy John in his cart and rode the back 9. It was so hot and I was so drained from the heat that all I could think about was staying hydrated. And that included soaking my hat with water and soaking a towel with cold water as well. I wrapped the towel around my neck, and between that and my hat, I was able to say somewhat cooler, but it's still in the upper 90s. The punchline of this is that I was so distracted from my game due to the heat that I didn't spend a lot of time worrying about my mechanics, only what I needed to do to get my ball to the next spot, and ended up shooting even par on the back 9. That's only the 3rd time I've ever done that. That back 9 also included one hole where my drive went far off to the right onto the next fairway, and someone picked up my ball and left me a crappy old one. And my partners were generous enough to give me a free drop there. And so I hit my next shot to the green, but it flew the green and it looked like it went out of bounds. So we looked for a while and finally found the ball. I was able to chip up onto the green. It rolled past the hole, but then I had an 18-footer that I sunk for par. Okay. Now, next week, you're going to hear more about my putting that round because I discussed it at length with our guests. And once again, we're going to have 2 incredible guests on the show. And this time it's going to be Carl Morris and Gary Nickel. And they return for the first time as a pair on Golf Smarter. I've had them on individually and they teach together. But this time I'll have them on together to talk about their new digital version of the very popular book, The Lost Art of Putting. I want to thank this week's Golf Smarter ambassador, James Wilson of Richmond, Missouri, who chose to receive Tony Manzoni's video of The Lost Fundamental as his gift for being a Golf Smarter ambassador. And I'd like you to be one of our ambassadors too. And I'll give you a free gift for the effort. As a matter of fact, I'll give you a choice from 3 different gifts. Now, to receive that gift, all you have to do is either write a review of the podcast from wherever you subscribe, or just introduce a new episode by sharing where you're from and where you play, like James did. James chose Tony Manzoni's video of the Lost Fundamental. Other gifts include a box of Odin X1 balls with the Golf Smarter logo, or a glove and glove storage compartment from redroostergolf.com. Now, I'm going to leave a link in today's show notes and on the blog post so that you can learn more about these 2 fabulous partners and their products. So if you're interested and want something from us for free, send an email and I'll get back to you with some instructions of what to do and what to say. Just write to golfsmarterpodcast@gmail.com, or do me a favor, click on the Hey Fred button when you visit golfsmarter.com.